I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am, by nature, a reasonable person. I pay my taxes on time. I use my turn signal. When someone drops something in a parking lot, I pick it up and run after them, even if they're already 3 cars away. I am not, in any meaningful sense, a person who creates chaos. I am a person who exists peacefully in the world and minds his own business and asks very little of the universe in return. The universe, on one particular Saturday in August, asked a lot of me. What I'm about to describe took place over the course of approximately 9 hours at a family reunion I was not related to, in a backyard I had never been in before, surrounded by people who believed, with complete, unwavering, enthusiastic conviction, that I was engaged to their cousin Stephanie. I was not engaged to Stephanie. I had met Stephanie 11 days before the reunion. I did not know her last name until I saw it on the mailbox when we pulled into the driveway. My best friend Derek, who knew all of this, who was sitting right next to me in the passenger seat when we pulled into that driveway, turned to me and said, and I want you to understand he said this with the energy of a man who had just been handed the greatest gift of his adult life. Bro, this is going to be the best day of my entire life. He was right. It was not the best day of mine. Let me explain how we got to the driveway because it requires some context. Stephanie and I had matched on a dating app about 2 weeks before the reunion. We'd exchanged messages for a few days. Good messages, the kind where you can tell the person is actually interesting and actually paying attention. And then we'd met for coffee, which went well enough that we agreed to a second date. The second date was a Thursday evening. Dinner at a restaurant that was nicer than my usual range, but not so nice that it felt like pressure. We talked for 3 hours. She was funny and sharp and had the specific quality of someone who had formed actual opinions about things through actual thinking rather than just absorbing the ambient opinions of people around her. I liked her. I was fairly sure she liked me. Things were going well. At the end of the evening, walking to our respective cars, she said, "So, I have kind of a weird question." I said, "Okay." She said, "My family has this annual reunion thing. It's a whole day, very chaotic, very a lot. My grandmother has been asking me for approximately 3 years when I'm going to bring someone, and my cousin just got engaged and there's going to be this whole big thing about it, and I thought maybe if you were interested you might want to come. As my date. Just as my date. It would be completely low stakes, nobody expects anything, it's just..." She stopped. I said, "I'd be happy to come." She looked relieved. "Yeah." I said, "Sure. It sounds fun." She said, "It's not going to be fun. I want to be honest with you. It's going to be chaotic and loud, and my Uncle Gerald makes the same 3 jokes every year, and my grandmother is going to ask you very personal questions within 4 minutes of meeting you." I said, "I have grandmothers. I understand the territory." She laughed. "Okay, good. It's Saturday." I said, "Saturday works." We said goodbye. I drove home feeling the pleasant, uncomplicated feeling of things going well in the early stages. I texted Derek on the way home, "Going to a family reunion with a girl I've been seeing." Derek texted back, "Whose family?" I texted, "Hers." Derek texted, "You've been on 2 dates." I texted, "I know." Derek texted, "I'm coming." I texted, "You're absolutely not coming." Derek texted, "Try and stop me." I should tell you about Derek. Derek has been my best friend since we were 19, which means he has had 11 years to develop an extremely detailed understanding of exactly how to be maximally unhelpful to me in any given situation. He is not a bad person. He is a genuinely good person who happens to find my discomfort extraordinarily entertaining and has never once, in 11 years, chosen my dignity over a good story. He's also, I should say, one of the most likable humans I've ever met. He has the specific social superpower of being able to walk into any room and immediately make everyone in it feel like the room is more fun now. This superpower is deployed exclusively for his own amusement and occasionally, accidentally, for the benefit of others. He talked his way into coming to the reunion by calling Stephanie directly, He had her number because I'd been stupid enough to put her in a group chat for logistical purposes and telling her that he was my ride, which was a lie, but also by the time she'd agreed to it, the situation had acquired a momentum that was hard to reverse. She said it was fine. The more the merrier. Her family was used to chaos. Derek, when I confronted him about this, said, "See? It's fine." I said, "You called her directly." He said, "You weren't answering my texts." I said, "Because you were asking to come to a date." He said, "It's a family reunion. It's not a date. There's like 40 people there." I said, "Derek." He said, "I'll be invisible. You won't even know I'm there." He was not invisible. He was the opposite of invisible. He was, from the moment we pulled into the driveway, the most visible person at the entire event. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. The driveway. Stephanie's family lived about 40 minutes outside the city in a house that had clearly been the gathering place for this family for decades. Big backyard, long driveway, the kind of property that absorbs 40 people without straining. When we pulled in, there were already cars lined up along the grass, and the sound of something that was half music, half conversation, half children creating chaos, drifting over the fence. Stephanie in the passenger seat. She'd let me drive because Derek had somehow also ended up in the car, sitting in the back seat radiating excitement, said, "Okay, a few things. My grandmother, Nana Rose, she's going to come find you immediately. She's warm but direct. Just answer her questions honestly, and you'll be fine." I said, "Got it." She said, "My Aunt Patricia is going to offer you food approximately every 6 minutes. Except at least every other one, or she'll think something is wrong." I said, "Every other one. Okay." She said, "And my cousin Heather just got engaged. Her fiancé's name is Tom. He's fine. Don't ask about their wedding plans because it's a whole thing." I said, "Noted." From the back seat, Derek said, "What about me? Any instructions for me?" Stephanie turned around. "Just be normal." Derek nodded solemnly. "Completely normal. Absolutely." I caught his eye in the rearview mirror. He looked like a man who had never been normal a day in his life and had no intention of starting now. We got out of the car. Here is what happened in the first 4 minutes, which I am going to recount with the precision of a person who has replayed it many times since and still cannot identify the exact moment it became unrecoverable. We walked through the gate into the backyard. Stephanie immediately spotted someone across the yard and said, "1 second," and walked away, which left me and Derek standing at the edge of a family gathering we had no context for, holding the fruit salad we'd been asked to bring. Derek looked at the yard. 40-something people in various configurations, some at tables, some standing in clusters, some chasing small children, some at a barbecue that a large man was presiding over with the authority of someone who takes grilling very seriously. String lights. Lawn games. The full production. Derek said, "This is wonderful." I said, "Be normal." He said, "I am normal. This is my normal face." Before I could respond, a small woman with white hair and the posture of someone who has never once in her life been uncertain about anything materialized in front of us. She was maybe 5'2", wearing a floral blouse, and she looked at me with the focused intensity of someone who had been waiting for this moment. She said, "You're the young man Stephanie's been seeing." I said, "Yes, I'm Ryan. It's lovely to meet you." She said, "Rose. I'm the grandmother. How serious is this?" A pause. I said, "We've been." Because Stephanie doesn't bring people home. She said it not accusatorially, just factually, with the blunt efficiency of someone who has no time for preamble. In 12 years of dating, she has brought exactly 2 people to family events. The first one, we don't discuss. The second one is you. I said, "I'm honored to be here." She looked at me. Then she looked at Derek. She said, "Who is this?" Derek said, "I'm the best friend." "Derek." She said, "Are you the best friend, or are you the chaperone?" Derek said, "Both, honestly." She almost smiled. Then she looked back at me and said, "You seem like a person with good manners. Stephanie needs someone with good manners." Her grandfather had excellent manners. She patted my arm. Come find me later. I want to talk to you properly. She walked away. Derek watched her go and said, I love her completely. I said, Derek. And then Stephanie's cousin Heather appeared. Heather was maybe 28, with the bright, slightly overwhelmed energy of someone who has recently gotten engaged and is now fielding approximately 400 opinions about it simultaneously. She was holding a glass of something pink, and she had the look of a person who had been talking about wedding venues for the last 3 hours and was running on fumes and enthusiasm in equal measure. She looked at me. She said, Oh my gosh, you must be Stephanie's. She told me about you. You're the one she's been. She stopped. She turned and called across the yard. MOM, come here. From across the yard, a woman I assumed was Patricia turned and began making her way over. Heather turned back to me. I'm Heather. Tom's around somewhere. You'll meet him. We just got engaged, which I'm sure Stephanie told you. I said, Congratulations, that's wonderful. She said, Thank you. It's been so crazy. The planning is... She waved her hand in a gesture that encompassed the entire complexity of wedding planning. Anyway, how long have you and Stephanie been together? And here is where the first small crack appeared. Because across the yard, I could see Stephanie, still talking to whoever she'd spotted, and I didn't want to call over to ask her how I was supposed to characterize our two-date situation to her cousin, so I made a judgment call. I said, A little while now. Heather's mother, Patricia, arrived. She looked at me. She said, Oh, he's handsome. She turned to Heather. He's handsome. She turned back to me. I'm Patricia, Stephanie's aunt. Are you hungry? We have. I said, The fruit salad is from us, it's... Patricia took the fruit salad from my hands like she'd been waiting for it specifically and said, Perfect. Are you hungry, though? There's potato salad. There's the pasta thing Margaret makes every year. There's... Derek materialized at my elbow and said, I'll take some of the pasta thing. Patricia redirected to Derek with the enthusiasm of someone who has been waiting for someone to take the pasta thing and swept him toward the food table, which left me alone with Heather. Heather said, in a slightly lowered voice, with the confiding tone of a person about to share something important, Can I tell you something? I'm really glad Stephanie brought you today. She's been okay, don't tell her I said this, she's been kind of going through it lately. Just the job stuff and the apartment situation and then the whole thing last year. She waved her hand. And I feel like she needs something good. You know? Something that's just good. I said, I think she's great. Heather looked at me with a softness that made me feel, for the first time, the weight of what I'd accidentally walked into. You really like her, she said. Not a question. I said, Yeah, I really do. She beamed. Okay, good. She called across the yard. Nana, come meet Stephanie's fiancé. I said, Her. The word had already traveled. At the volume Heather had deployed, it had reached approximately 30 people simultaneously. I watched heads turn. I watched the information ripple across the backyard like a stone dropped in water. I said, Much quieter, she said. But Nana Rose was already turning back from where she'd been walking, with an expression of such complete and radiant joy that I felt the floor of the situation drop out entirely beneath me. And Derek, at the food table, turned around with a plate of pasta and a face that said he had heard everything and was currently experiencing the best moment of his adult life. I want to describe the next 40 minutes as calmly as I can, because they were not calm. The word fiancé had entered the ecosystem, and it was not leaving. It was spreading and growing and attaching itself to me with the tenacity of something biological. People came to introduce themselves, uncles, cousins, family, friends, neighbors who had apparently been attending this reunion for 15 years and felt entirely entitled to participate in any major announcement. Nana Rose held both my hands and said, I knew. When I saw you at the gate, I said to myself, This one is different. An uncle whose name I caught as either Ronald or Donald shook my hand with the grip of a man who has been waiting to size up a future family member and said, So what do you do? Aunt Patricia reappeared and said, Are you hungry? Because we have more of the... A child approximately 6 years old ran up to me, looked at me with enormous eyes and said, "Are you going to be at Christmas?" and then ran away before I could answer. Through all of this, Derek stood approximately 10 feet away with his plate of pasta and his expression of pure, undiluted joy, making absolutely no effort to help, intervene, or do anything except occasionally catch my eye and mouth words at me that were not helpful. The words he mouthed at various points included, "This is incredible. You're doing great. Don't break eye contact." And at one point, simply, "Wow." I tried, 3 times, to find a moment to correct the situation quietly. Each time, someone new arrived before I could speak. The reunion had a specific social physics. There was always someone approaching, always someone mid-sentence, always a new introduction happening before the last one had finished. I couldn't find a gap wide enough to say, "Actually, I think there may have been a misunderstanding," without making it the announcement of the afternoon. Stephanie found me about 35 minutes in. She'd finished whatever conversation had pulled her away, turned around to locate me, and found me standing in the center of a cluster of her relatives being enthusiastically welcomed into the family. She walked over. She looked at me. She looked at Heather. She said, "What happened?" Heather said, "Stephanie, we've been getting to know your fiancé. Why didn't you tell us?" Stephanie looked at me. I looked at Stephanie. She looked at me with an expression that contained, in equal parts, confusion, horror, the beginning of something that might have been laughter, and a genuine question about what exactly she was supposed to do next. I looked at her with an expression that said, "I am so sorry. I don't know how this happened. Please help me." She looked at Heather. She opened her mouth. And then Nana Rose appeared and took Stephanie's face in both hands and said, "My darling girl." Finally, with such complete, profound, grandmother-level emotion that Stephanie's mouth closed again. And Stephanie looked at me over her grandmother's shoulder with an expression that had resolved into something I could only read as, "We are going to fix this, but not right now, not like this, not while my grandmother is crying." She put her arm around her grandmother. She said, "Let's go get some food, Nana." They walked away. I stood alone for approximately 2 seconds. Derek appeared at my elbow with a fresh plate of food and said, very quietly, "You are engaged, buddy." I said, "Derek," he said, "to a woman you've known for 11 days. I said, "I need you to help me fix this." He considered this for a moment with the seriousness of someone genuinely weighing options. Then he said, "No." I said, "Derek." He said, "Ryan, I want you to think about what you're asking me to give up." I said, "I'm asking you to help me not ruin a relationship I actually care about before it's even started." He said, "You're already basically engaged. The relationship is clearly going great." I said, "Derek." He handed me a bread roll. "Eat something. You look pale." The middle portion of the afternoon was an exercise in the kind of sustained, low-grade, smile-through-it social performance that I think only people who have accidentally committed to something enormous can truly understand. I met Tom, Heather's actual fiancé, who was a perfectly nice man who shook my hand and said, "Welcome to the chaos." I ate Aunt Patricia's food approximately every 6 minutes because she kept appearing and, at this point, eating was the only thing I had control over. I sat at a picnic table with Nana Rose for 20 minutes while she told me about Stephanie as a child, the specific, granular detail of a grandmother who has been paying close attention for decades, and I listened with genuine interest because the details were wonderful and also because listening was the one thing I could do in this situation that wasn't making it worse. Nana Rose said, "She was so serious as a little girl. Always thinking. Always watching. Her sister was the loud one. Stephanie was the one in the corner with a book, looking at everything."
She paused.
But when she laughed, when something really got her, you could hear it across the house. I said, "I know exactly what you mean." She looked at me. "You've heard it." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Good." She patted my hand. That's how I knew. The ones who are in that laugh, they're worth keeping. I sat there thinking about the 2 dates, about the 3 hours at dinner on Thursday, about the specific quality of laughing with someone who doesn't laugh easily, and how that quality had been part of why I'd said yes to the reunion in the first place. I thought about how badly I was currently bungling the associated logistics. Derek materialized briefly to refill his plate, caught my eye, mouthed, "How's it going?" with enormous cheerfulness, and disappeared before I could respond. Stephanie found me again around 4 o'clock. She sat down next to me at the picnic table where I'd migrated after Nana Rose left, and she looked at the yard for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, I'm sorry." I said, "You're sorry?" She said, "Heather does this. She runs ahead of things. I should have warned you more specifically." She paused. I think she called our engagement official to 3 different people while I was getting Nana Rose her tea. I said, "It's being described as official?" She said, "My Uncle Ronald apparently posted something on Facebook." I said, "Ronald? I thought his name might be Ronald." She looked at me. Then she laughed, that specific laugh, the one Nana Rose had described, the one that goes from nothing to real in the span of a second. She pressed her hand over her mouth. She said, "This is a disaster." I said, "It's a disaster." She said, "What do we do?" I said, "I think we have to tell them. I think the longer we don't, the worse it gets." She said, I know we do." She looked at the yard, at Heather showing someone a photo on her phone, at Nana Rose talking to Patricia with the particular animation of people discussing good news, at the uncle whose name was Ronald, who is almost certainly on Facebook right now. Can we wait until after dinner? Just let me have a few more hours of my grandmother being this happy before I have to explain. I looked at Nana Rose across the yard. I said, "Yeah, okay, after dinner." Stephanie said, "Thank you." A pause. "I'm really sorry about this." I said, "It's genuinely okay." She said, "Is it?" I said, "Ask me again in a couple of hours." She laughed again. Shorter this time, but real. She stood up. "I'm going to get more potato salad. Do you want?" "Please," I said. She went to get potato salad. Derek appeared from nowhere, sat in her vacated spot, and said, "She seems great." I said, "She is great." He said, "Are you going to mess this up?" I said, "I'm trying very hard not to." He said, "Good. For what it's worth, her family loves you." I said, "Her family thinks I'm engaged to her." He said, "Details." He stood up. "For the record, I think you should come clean after dinner. Make it funny. Lead with the absurdity of it." I said, "That's actually good advice." He said, "I have my moments." He wandered back to the food table. Dinner at the reunion was a long, sprawling, communal affair, tables pushed together, food passed in every direction, conversations happening at 6 different volumes simultaneously. I was seated between Nana Rose and the large man from the barbecue, who turned out to be Stephanie's Uncle Vic and who had the energy of a person who considers feeding people an act of love and takes it seriously. Uncle Vic, within the first 5 minutes of dinner, gave me a full account of the barbecue methodology, the specific wood, the timing, the technique, with the detail and passion of a professional briefing. I listened with genuine attention because the food was extraordinary and the passion was infectious, and because, honestly, listening carefully to Vic about barbecue was significantly easier than thinking about what was coming after dinner. Nana Rose, on my other side, said very little during dinner but occasionally touched my arm when something across the table made her laugh, like I was someone she'd known long enough to share the joke with. Stephanie, across the table, caught my eye periodically. We had developed, over the course of the afternoon, a specific look, a quick glance that said, "Still here, still in this, we'll handle it," and we exchanged it several times during dinner like a private signal. Derek, seated further down the table next to Heather, had apparently decided to spend dinner becoming Heather's new best friend. I could hear fragments of their conversation. He was asking about the engagement, about Tom, about how they'd met, with the warm, focused interest that was Derek's greatest social weapon. Heather was thriving. Tom, next to her, was also thriving. Derek had that effect. Around the time dessert appeared, something involving strawberries that Patricia had made and was extremely proud of, Heather clinked her glass and stood up. She said, "Okay, since we're all here and it's that kind of day, I want to say something." The table quieted. She said, "First, obviously, I have to say how happy Tom and I are to celebrate with all of you today. You know this family means everything to me, and getting to share this with you is—" She got slightly emotional. Tom put his hand on her back. "Okay, I'm not going to cry. But I also want to say, because it's good news and good news should be shared, that Stephanie and Ryan have some news of their own." She looked at us across the table. "We are very happy to welcome Ryan officially into this family." The table applauded. Nana Rose patted my arm. Stephanie looked at me. I looked at Stephanie. And I thought, okay, here we go. I stood up. I don't fully know why I stood up. Some instinct, probably the same one that makes me return drop things in parking lots. The instinct toward doing the right thing when the moment arrives, whether or not the moment is convenient. The table looked at me. 40-something people, mid-applause, waiting. Stephanie looked at me with an expression that was very carefully neutral, the expression of someone who genuinely did not know what was about to happen and had decided to trust it. I said, "I want to say something, and I want to say it honestly because you've all been incredibly warm today, and you deserve honesty." The table settled. I said, "Stephanie and I are not engaged." A pause. I said, "We have been on 2 dates. 11 days ago, we matched on an app. Last Thursday, we had dinner. Today is the 3rd time we've spent time together." I paused. "Heather, and I say this with complete affection, there was a misunderstanding at the beginning of the afternoon, and instead of correcting it immediately, I let it go on too long because—" I looked at Nana Rose. "Because your grandmother looked at me when we arrived and said, 'This one is different,' and I didn't want to be the thing that changed her expression." The table was very quiet. I said, "I also want to say, and this is the part one mean most, that the reason I didn't correct it earlier is also because today has been one of the best days I've had in a long time. And that's not nothing. That's actually something worth saying out loud." I looked at Stephanie. I said, "You warned me this wouldn't be fun. You said it was going to be chaotic and loud, and your uncle would make the same 3 jokes." I glanced at Ronald. 4, actually, but who's counting? A ripple of surprised laughter around the table. "And you were right. It was all of those things. It was also Nana Rose telling me about you as a kid. Vic explaining the exact wood he uses for the ribs. Patricia making sure I ate something every 6 minutes. Heather and Tom being exactly as happy as people should be when they find something real." I paused. It was a family. A real, loud, actual family, and you let me be in it for a day, and I'm grateful for that. I sat down. The table was quiet for a moment. Then Uncle Vic said, "The wood is applewood. For the record." The table laughed. The real kind, the sudden kind, the kind that breaks a room open. Nana Rose, beside me, was quiet for a moment. Then she said, not to the table, just to me, very quietly, "You said this one is different. How did you know I said that?" I said, "I heard you when you walked away." She considered this. Then she said, "I wasn't wrong, you know. It wasn't about the engagement. It was about the way you looked at her." I said, "How did I look at her?" She said, like she was worth showing up for. Across the table, Stephanie was looking at me. Not the private signal look of the afternoon. Something more open than that. The look of someone who has just heard something real and is still taking its dimensions. Derek, from further down the table, caught my eye. He raised his glass slightly. He mouthed, "Told you." The hour after dinner was something I didn't expect. I expected the reveal to deflate things, to create awkwardness, an abrupt end to the warmth of the afternoon, a polite winding down as people registered the misunderstanding and recalibrated. That's what I braced for. What happened instead was, the conversation kept going. Heather came around the table and hugged me, which I hadn't anticipated, and said, "Okay, that was maybe the sweetest thing I've ever seen at one of these, and also I'm sorry for the whole fiancé thing." Tom shook my hand again and said, "For what it's worth, you handled that a lot better than I would have." Uncle Vic appeared and gave me what I can only describe as an approving nod, which from a man who expresses love through meat and fire felt significant. Ronald, who I had now confirmed was absolutely Ronald, said, "I'm going to have to delete that Facebook post." I said, "I'd appreciate that." He said, "It already has 47 likes." I said, "Ronald." He said, "I'll delete it." A pause. "The comments are very positive, for what it's worth." I said, "Ronald, please." He went to delete it. Nana rose before she left for the evening. She went to bed early. She explained she was 81. She had earned early bedtimes, stopped in front of me and said, "Come back." I said, "To the reunion?" She said, "Anywhere we are, come back." She went inside. Stephanie found me standing by the back fence around 8 o'clock, when the reunion was winding down to its last 10 people and the string lights were the primary illumination. She said, "So?" I said, "So?" She said, "That was." I said, "A lot." She said, "Yeah." A pause. "The thing you said about it being one of the best days you've had." I said, "True." She said, "Even with all of..." She gestured at the yard, at the general aftermath of the afternoon. I said, "Especially with all of that." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "I want to try the actual thing. Not the accidental version. The one where we both know what we're doing and where we're going." I said, "Yeah, me too." She said, "It'll be slower." I said, "Slower's fine." She said, "My grandmother's going to ask about you constantly." I said, "I genuinely don't mind that." She looked at me. Then, my uncle posted about our fake engagement on Facebook and it got 47 likes. I said, "He deleted it." She said, "He deleted the post. The screenshots are forever." I said, "I'm aware." She laughed. "The real one. The across-the-house one." From somewhere behind us, Derek's voice said, "Sorry to interrupt. Vic wants to know if you want to take some ribs home." We both turned. Derek was standing there with a container of ribs and an expression of complete innocence. Stephanie said, Were you standing there listening?" Derek said, "I was standing here first, actually. You two came to me." He held up the ribs. Vic said to take them. He considers it a compliment. Stephanie looked at me. I said, "He really does." She took the ribs. Derek said, "For what it's worth, and I know I was not helpful today, and I know that, and I accept it, I think this worked out." Stephanie said, "You were spectacularly unhelpful." Derek said, "I prefer to think of it as not interfering with a natural process." She stared at him. He said, "I'm going to go say goodbye to Nana Rose." Stephanie said, "She went to bed." He said, "I'll be quiet." And he went inside. Stephanie watched him go. She said, "He's a lot." I said, "He's the best person I know." She considered this. Then, yeah, I can see that. We drove home at 9. Derek in the back seat, container of Vic's ribs on his lap, with the satisfied silence of a man who has had an excellent day and knows it. About 20 minutes into the drive, he said, "Ronald texted me." I said, "Why does Ronald have your number?" Derek said, "We exchanged numbers during the pasta situation. He's invited me to his bowling league." I said, "Derek." He said, "I might go. I've never bowled in a league." Stephanie, in the passenger seat, made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sigh. Derek said, "Nana Rose also said, and I'm quoting directly, 'Tell your friend he has good instincts.'" I said, "She said that about me." Derek said, "She said it to me, about you. So, technically, it's mine to deliver." I said, "That's not how that." He said, "I'm just the messenger." We drove in silence for a moment. Then Stephanie said, "Next time I go to a family thing and there will be a next time, there's always a next time. Derek can come again." Derek said, "Obviously." I said, "Obviously?" Stephanie said, "He kept Heather occupied for 3 hours. Do you know how rare that is? Heather has a lot of energy." Derek said, "She's great. We're friends now." I said, "Of course you are." He said, Tom's also great. He knows a lot about bowling, actually. He and Ronald are going to get along. I said, Derek. He said, what? I said, thank you for not helping. A pause. He said, you're welcome. He looked out the window. Then, for what it's worth, the thing you said at the table, about it being one of the best days. He paused. Same, man. Genuinely same. I looked in the rearview mirror. He was looking out the window with the expression of someone who means something and is slightly embarrassed by meaning it. I said, yeah. We drove the rest of the way home in the comfortable quiet of people who have been through something together and don't need to keep talking about it. The Facebook post got 47 likes before Ronald deleted it. 3 people had already commented congratulations by the time it came down. One distant relative apparently texted Stephanie's mom before the correction reached her, which required a subsequent phone call. Nana Rose, Stephanie told me later, was not bothered by the clarification in the slightest. She said, the timeline doesn't matter. I saw how he looked at her. And then she asked when I was coming to Sunday dinner. I went to Sunday dinner 3 weeks later. Derek was not invited to Sunday dinner. He has not fully recovered from this. Stephanie and I are, well, we're figuring it out. In the slow, actual, intentional way she said she wanted. The way where you know what you're doing and you know where you're going, and the family reunion was a bizarre and chaotic beginning that neither of us would have written on purpose, and that somehow, in the way that the best things sometimes do, worked out anyway. 47 likes. Ronald's bowling league starts in October. Life is strange and frequently hilarious, and occasionally, if you're very lucky, the thing that was supposed to be a disaster turns out to be the beginning of something you didn't know you were looking for. That's all I've got. Asterisk if you have an accidental chaos story, a fake fiancé, a mistaken identity, a misunderstanding that somehow made everything better. I want to hear every single one. Drop it in the comments. Asterisk. Asterisk subscribe if you want more of these. New one coming soon. Asterisk. Asterisk take care of yourselves. And if you ever find yourself accidentally engaged at a stranger's family reunion, just tell the truth after dinner. Works every time. Asterisk.